Alright, now that we've verified all components are in the box, we're going to start by removing the old fuel line from the primary filter to the gear pump. Sounds simple enough, right? Let's see how that goes. Alright, now to get started, we're going to pull the line off of the fuel filter. Comes down, got that guy there, that guy there, goes up to a junction here, which appears to be leaking on my truck perhaps, and then up to the pump. So that's the line we're taking off, goes across, right underneath the cross member there is where mine is ran. One thing I've learned with these trucks is, depending on who's worked on them, every one of them can be just a little bit different, so we'll go ahead and get our wrenches and figure out what we need to take off here. Alright, I've got the line off from the pump there. I just broke it. Took the bolt off there, took the bolt off there. I believe those were 7/16 holding those on there. And then loosened it up, took it off up there at the pump. Alright, let's go on to the next one. Alright, take that line off at the pump, follow it along, and there's a bolt holding it to the block there, along with your fuel heater filter if you have that. I'm also removing that today as well in the process, so that whole works right here is coming off. That is a 5/8 socket on my truck holding that on there. Alright, so let's see, we started by removing the old fuel line from the primary filter to the gear pump. We did that. Removed the fuel line from the gear pump to the secondary filter mount. We did that. Now we're going to remove the fuel line from the secondary filter mount to the hydraulic head. So that's what we're going to do right now. Alright, we followed that line up to here. Used a 5/8 wrench to take this one off. I took it off and the line fell down like it was supposed to. Came off pretty easy. Next thing you want to do, if you haven't already, use the little petcocks on the bottom of your filter cans and just kind of drain some of the excess fuel out of the system. That'll help the process so you're not getting soaked every time you unhook something. Now you want to loosen these two guys up here to get your canister filters off. Those are a 5/8. And I believe the instructions are going to tell us next to come off of the line back here and unhook that, I believe. Let's go back to the instructions. Alright, let's see here. So we just removed the fuel line from the secondary filter mount to the hydraulic head. Now we're going to remove from the pressure regulator T on the front of the hydraulic head to the secondary filter T. We're going to remove from the pressure regulator T on the front of the hydraulic head to the secondary filter T. Let's go look at that. Alright, so the hose came off of this T with a 5/8 wrench and goes down here to the hydraulic head. That also comes off with a 5/8 wrench. Alright, so the directions it said to go off the filter housing. Try to fish this down there. Go off the filter housing. You can see mine is marked out. Obviously that's fuel going out to the hydraulic head. It's 5/8 wrench there. That one snakes down behind the filter housing down there and moves its way over to the hydraulic head right down here. That is also a 5/8 wrench to get that one off. Good luck. Alright, so we removed the line from the pressure regulator T on the front of the hydraulic head to the secondary filter T. We removed the fuel line from the secondary filter mount to the hydraulic head. That came off the back side of the filter head. Now we're going to remove the fuel line from the secondary filter T to the copper fuel return line just below it. Alright, so we're going from the copper T And that's our fuel line there. That actually drops down there, curves to the back of the truck, and that is our return line that goes back to the fuel tank. So that one is an 11/16 fitting on my truck right there. Up until then, everything else has been 5/8. Alright, finally remove the secondary filter mount. Set aside the stock washers and nuts that hold the mount in place. You don't have to take the cans off to get that mount off of there. You can if you want to. Get all that stuff out of the way. For me, it was easier to just take it all off with the cans attached to the mount and drop it straight out the bottom once all the lines were unhooked. Came out pretty easy as long as you had somebody underneath to catch. Alright, in regards to the 3 bolts that actually hold the filter housing to the block, that little guy in the middle right there, that was probably the biggest challenge. So I used a wrench this style to get it out of there. All I had was a metric, but it did the trick to get it out of there. The other 2, you can use a standard open box end wrench to get those other 2 off of there, but the one in the middle gave me just a small bit of grief. If you don't have the right tools, it's going to give you a lot of grief. Now we're going to bolt the new mount in place of the secondary filter mount. We may need to use some of the supplied washers between the mount and the block. This will make sure your new selected filters do not make contact with the studs. Alright, let's go see about our studs, shall we? Alright, got the new filter head installed. Per the instruction sheet, the 3 bolts that were there to mount it are all quite sufficient. The one on this end, I don't know if I can fish the camera down there far enough. The one on the front side, so the furthest from the firewall, which would be your secondary filter mount, that one had potential of rubbing on the filter. The filter that I have, the 3528 from NAPA, it didn't rub, but I could barely get a piece of cardboard in between the 2. Just wasn't a fan of how close that was, so I took the washers that I took off of the secondary housing and I put them behind the new housing. I used nylon lock nuts to secure this housing to the block. Those did not come with a kit, those are extra, so if you choose to do it that way, I would recommend that. Alright, we're on page 2, installing the new fuel lines. We got all the old stuff off the truck, so that's a win. All fuel lines are installed, working away from the longest supplied fuel line to the shortest. Alright, easy enough, I think I can handle that. Step 1, remove the fuel line from the fuel tank and set it aside. If you want to completely remove this fuel line and primary filter, you can, but it's not necessary. Alright, see what we got. Okay, per the instructions, we start with the longest line first. We fed it through the frame. It is attached at the fuel tank. Mine was a 3/4 inch, I believe. Yep, 3/4 inch wrench to take the old one off and to put the new one back on. 3/4 inch wrench here at the fuel tank. With the other stuff going through the hole, that was a tight fit. Just FYI, I had to break the old line to get it out of there because it was an old copper line with bends and it just didn't want to feed, so I just broke it, took it out. Alright, now I'm under the truck. Fuel line's up there. You can see the old grommet that used to be in the hole. I got rid of that. Cut that off. Hose runs up to the inside of the frame rail. Runs along the inside of the frame rail to this cross member here. Okay. There's a cross member. U-drive shaft. Fuel hose goes across that cross member. It's tucked up inside there. You can see the new hose in there buried. Run along the frame rail. Follows the fuel return hose. And then heads on up to the filters. There's a fuel return hose, the fitting that I had to make, and that goes up to the top side of the pump for the fuel return hose. So that's fuel coming from the tank, goes up to the filters, and that's my fuel return hose coming back to the fuel tank from the top side of the injection pump. The other hoses from the filter housing, those are all installed. We'll slide down underneath the truck here some more. Those are all tied in underneath the pump. Those go back up to the filter housing. Everything that came across the front before, you can take that out. And then I'm going to remove the old filter and housing as well, and that line, because it's not needed. And that should be everything. Note for the install: once you get the new filter head on the truck, make note that all fuel inlets are on the rear of the filter heads and fuel outlets are on the front of the filter heads. Pretty cut and dry, but it also is noted in another place in the instructions as well. Alright, first line is attached to the fitting closest to the firewall, comes from the fuel tank. This next one here, oh look at that, I put it on the wrong one. Alright, the second longest fuel line is used next to go from the outlet of the primary filter head to the inlet of the gear pump. Do not attach to the gear pump fitting until you have replaced the gear pump outlet fitting with the supplied 45-degree jick to pipe fitting. Just FYI, the picture shows in the instructions to go ahead and swap out that fitting. In the picture it looks like a hydraulic head or pump that is not on a truck. That would be a hell of a lot easier. Unfortunately mine is on the truck and it was a bit of a bear, but I got it. Last resort I ended up having to Dremel off that fitting because I could not get that one to break loose to turn it out of the way. So it was a real bear, probably the hardest thing I've had to do on this install, but I got it off of there. So just so you know, the engineers obviously put this thing together off the truck. Let's see what we got. Alright, so I got my lines installed here. We're under the front driver's side of the truck. These two lines go up here. They're installed. They go back up to the filter head. Obviously that long one there is the main fuel supply. And there's the outlet coming to the pump. That one there, the blue one, goes up to the inlet on secondary filter. So that little guy right there, you had to swap out the elbow for the new piece, and that was the hardest part so far. A lot of cussing on that one. Alright, so we replaced our 45-degree jick to pipe fitting, got that line hooked up, and then that went to the outlet of the primary filter head. Next we're going to need the longest available unused line, and that's going to go from the gear pump outlet to the secondary filter inlet. So the secondary filter mount is the one most forward on the truck, and the inlet is the most rearward of that mount, if that makes sense. So of the two mounts for the filter to screw onto, it's the one in the front, and it's going to be the rear fitting on that filter adapter. Alright, I've got 3 lines hooked up so far. See if I can get a better angle with the camera here. So there's your primary over there on the right by the firewall. And then the one in the back is out of the primary. The one in the front is into the secondary. Alright, the next line will again be the longest available, unused. This will go from the secondary filter outlet to the hydraulic head inlet. Remove the stock fitting in the hydraulic head and replace it with the supplied 45-degree jick-to-pipe fitting. Now, if your truck has not had the FDC bypassed, you can do so using this line. However, you will just need to use pipe plugs to plug the inlet and outlet on the fuel density compensator. The truck that I'm working on, my truck, it was already bypassed, so that step was done. Just so you know. We are talking, I believe there's a picture. We are talking that fitting right there. That's the guy we're replacing. And that's where we're screwing to. The fitting on the filter housing, okay, the secondary filter outlet. So on that housing, it's going to be the furthest one forward on the truck. See what we got. Now the next one that's kind of a bear is down there. I have to take the elbow out of the hydraulic head and replace it with a new fitting. This job could also be a little bit easier if you removed your heater unit, if you have one. I was able to sneak my wrench into the opening there and get that out of there, but again, it was a little harder than it should have been. It'd be a lot easier if it was off the truck. Now, last step, using your final fuel line and fitting, replace the 90-degree compression fitting on the bottom of the fuel regulator T, which is located on the front of the hydraulic head. Okay, so there's a 90-degree jick-to-pipe fitting. That was included. The 90-degree fitting. We're going to replace that 90-degree compression fitting with the supplied 90-degree jick-to-pipe fitting. Now, my truck already had the FDC bypassed, so it may look a little different than yours. And I'll just scroll up to the video here. That's the fitting in question that I had to replace. Okay. Now that is the T that is on the front of my hydraulic head. But as I mentioned, things are a little bit different. And if you've worked on these trucks at all, you'll know well that one truck to the next, there's nothing the same. They're all very different. So yeah, replace that with the 90 and you're good to go, depending on how your truck is set up. And the other end of that line, this line has a flare end that should be threaded into the copper fuel return line before attaching to the jick fitting. Now on my truck, somebody had already boogered that fitting up on the fuel line down below, and I actually had to have a new fuel line made to make this kit actually work. To my understanding, this is not common practice, but as I mentioned, I think when somebody bypassed the FDC, they boogered up the return line and nothing matched up, nothing fit right. I've included a picture of that, and I had to have another line made. So just be forewarned, that was the only hiccup that I ran into. And again, I think when somebody bypassed the FDC, they boogered up that return line, and I had to have one made in order to make this work. Got the truck running after my fuel system upgrade. Basically, I opened the bleeder on the bottom of one of my filters, turned on the in-tank pump. It took all about 5 to 10 seconds. Diesel started shooting out of the filter, primed everything real quick, shut the pump off, closed the valve, the bleeder on the bottom of the filter, jumped up in the cab, cranked the truck for about 5 to 10 seconds. Truck fired right up and she idles nice. Let's see how it drives.